Today's gospel follows immediately upon the miraculous feeding of 5,000. We hear that Jesus has gone up the mountain to pray. We oftentimes hear of people in the gospel, in the Bible, going off to the mountain. For the mountain is often depicted as a place of encounter of the divine. As he goes up the mountain, he has sent his disciples into a boat to cross the lake. There, on the boat, they encounter a headwind and are being battered by the waves. To the ancients, and even to our day, the sea can be a frightening place. And well, it is. International Organizations for Migration records that 2,062 migrants died or were missing in the Mediterranean between January and July of this year. Biblical images of the sea, of the waters, begin in the creation story, describing the waters as chaos. And of course, we have the destruction of the flood in the story of Noah. We have Pharaoh's army being drowned in the sea. There are conceptions in the Bible that the waters can be the dwelling place of evil and terrible things. So Matthew is juxtaposing this miraculous story of feeding 5,000 from a single lunchbox to the story of the disciples in a very frightening situation. Moments of encouragement followed quickly by the storms of life are pretty commonplace. We have all known times where we've been knocked nearly senseless by some kind of wave of calamity in our lives. The death of a loved one, the loss of a job, being the victim of a crime, barely regaining our footing, only to be pummeled again by the next wave. And then times of calm, of comfort, perhaps on a Sunday morning in this place. This space where you sit is called the nave. If you look up, you can almost imagine the roof as the underside of a ship. But in the midst of that storm we read in today's gospel, we can well imagine that the disciples had forgotten the miracle of the loaves and fishes while the waves pounded against their small boat. And if they did remember it, perhaps they had thoughts of how ironic it was that they witnessed such a wondrous event only to perish alone, forgotten by Jesus as he is off some distant place praying. How do we understand the tossings and turnings and upheavals of our life and where Jesus fits into the situation? Is he near? Is he far? Do we see these terrible events in our lives as a sign that God is distant and absent, or even of the presence of malevolent powers working their evil against us? Expecting the worst. Even the disciples. Imagine that this figure walking across the water was a ghost. They didn't recognize him as Jesus. But he calls out to them, "Take heart, do not be afraid. It is I." Even in the midst of the storm, the great I am is present. And in that presence, in that recognition, Peter, simultaneously stepping out in faith and perhaps seeking evidence of Jesus' power over the situation, he leaves the boat and begins to walk across the stormy sea. But turning his eyes from Jesus, noticing the wind blowing hard into his face, Peter begins to sink and his fear returns. He cries out, "Lord, save me." In regaining his focus on Jesus, Jesus immediately responds. Peter brings his situation, his need, to Jesus' attention, and Jesus immediately reaches out his hand and catches him and returns him safely to the boat. And the sea steadies. The ship, or even a small boat, was an ancient Christian symbol that comes to our day. It is a symbol of a church tossed on the sea of disbelief, worldliness, and persecution, but finally seeking and reaching safe harbor with its cargo of human souls. This Thursday, I step out of the boat of St. Barnabas to begin a 10-week sabbatical. Around us, things are fairly calm. We've hired a parish administrator to look after much of the day-to-day work of the church. Our wardens are well seasoned in handling anything that might come up. Many of you remember Father Ian Chadwick as a steady force from a few years ago when he served at St. Barnabas around 2017. And yet, if you're like me, there might be a little churning inside. I haven't gotten out of a boat for a 10-week sabbatical in the entirety of my career. It's rather strange. I feel unsettled. I'm not looking for any kind of sympathy. I know how privileged I am and what a wonderful opportunity this is. But I set out to do what one is to do on a sabbatical. Sabbatical, the same root word of Sabbath, a time of rest and prayer. And like Jesus who climbed the mountain to pray, I'll be spending much of my time on two mountains where holy men and women have encountered God: Avila in Spain and Assisi in Italy. These ancient medieval walled cities have many churches. And I intend to have times of private and corporate prayer and worship in these places. Of course, it is my hope to have an encounter with Christ there. But will he reach out and grab my hand? I cannot know for certain. But I step out in faith and in my prayer, in my intentions, I will pray for you while I'm away. And I will pray for my safe return to the boat of St. Barnabas, to be with you in worship and service. I invite your prayers for Kathy and I as we step out. And like Peter and Jesus, we will return to the boat. Jesus will not leave you. And we hear in today's gospel, and those in the boat worship Jesus, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So let us join with that ancient act of faith, of gathering in the nave as a community of faith, sometimes tossed in stormy waters, and other times at rest, gathered to worship and to pray and to profess our faith. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.